we have an international paedophile ring that's been operating within every democratic government on our planet. There has also been connections to the Middle East all over the world. We're looking at the killing of children. We're going back to just a guy called Sidney Cook, which those that are initiated into this subject will understand. We're looking at the torture of children. We're looking at snuff movies. We're talking and I'm not just talking about in this country, I'm talking about all over the world, every sovereign country, everywhere. We're talking about disabled children being ferried between all the Channel Islands, especially the Isle of Sark, the Isle of Wight, Jersey and Guernsey. We're talking about, I don't know if you can put it down as a religion, as a satanic religion. Is it a religion? This is not a sexual thing. The killing and the making of snuff movies, the trafficking of children, the raping, the torture of disabled children. It is, like I say, I don't know what word to use. I just see it as a satanic religion. Yes. The alternative media is working with the national media, and it is not just Pie Mesh Films. At the moment, I have a very small, tight team working on this, but the national media is working with the alternative media. Right. And we are talking about kidnapping, murder, torture. It is as we've always thought that world politics, the national media and the alternative media to a degree is being controlled by paedophilia versus blackmail.
A 2002 secret Metropolitan Police report called Operation Tiberius that's been leaked to the press. It found that a secret network of Freemasons inside the police have been used by organised crime gangs to corrupt the criminal justice system. This is the second secret police report to be leaked in the last 6 months. Project Riverside, another report from 2008, came to the same conclusion.
Well, joining me now is Councillor Keith Gregory, who you just saw in that report from Kieran Jenkins, and Bill Brereton, a former Deputy Police Commissioner here in North Wales. Keith Gregory, are the Masons an avenue that needs to be investigated?
Masons definitely need to be investigated, especially in North Wales. I think nearly everyone, especially on the list that I have, are all members of some sort of Masonic lodge.
Rodney Shakespeare is a political commentator joining us from London. Rodney Shakespeare, is this going to, first of all, be legally binding? And given the fact that you have politicians involved, perhaps, do you think that anything can result out of this?
First of all, this inquiry is being headed by a New Zealand judge who happens to be a woman. Now, that's very, very significant. You see, in the UK, so many things are hidden up essentially by Freemasonry. And in this particular subject, and the allegations of the Westminster a sex abuse ring against abuse against children, it's rather important that you have such a person in charge of the inquiry.
You found out that someone within the police department, a constable, had said that pretty much your files and your reports were being deleted. Mm-hmm. Did he mention anything beyond that as to, you know, maybe you should be careful, or there's higher, you know, something going on within the police here? Did you get that feeling right away that this wasn't just some small group, that there was something going on with blocking an actual investigation within the police department, or?
Well, I think he was brave to tell me that much to begin with, and I thank him for that. At the time, I think I was in such shock that that would be happening. Later, I put it together of just how incredibly organized this is. It's like this giant underground connection, you know, and you don't know who belongs to it and who doesn't. And evidence disappears all the time. I had somebody call me up from Base Borden, and he had been part of something there. I can't remember what it was. I was a little afraid to go and meet with him because he said, you're dealing with satanic abuse, right? And I said, yeah, but at that point I dipped my toe in the water, but really didn't know anything about it. And I met him for lunch, and he said it goes on at the base all the time. And I said, well, where's the evidence? And he said, we have to turn in any evidence, and eventually as it gets passed along, that evidence disappears. And I think that happens in a lot of cases, you know, where it's really hard to get evidence about this. But there's a huge network. I think the Masons being a case in point. And not everybody in the Masons is into the dark side of things, but I know there's a stream of people in the Masons who are, and the good guys have no idea that the other side is there.
It's so compartmentalized, I guess.
Yes,
yeah.
But in the Middle Ages, the Masons flew two standards, the dark and the light, and they walked both paths, you know. So I don't know exactly what those paths entail, but I would assume that one gets better and better the higher they go towards their 33rd degree, and the other gets worse and worse. And it's all about dealing in power and unseen power.
Ancient knowledge that has been blocked from our view now. Like a lot of people are completely unfamiliar with this in our day. We're so absorbed in television world and, you know, is the mall open and working our jobs and paying our taxes and trying to be good, productive citizens and all this and obeying the, you know, innumerable amount of laws that are put up for everybody to follow every day. But when there's something going on in the undercurrent behind world events, behind local events, or behind events in just individuals' lives, which is where you came in, to peer into that takes a lot of courage. And it definitely, over the years, I'm sure your own sanity and your own reason and courage has been probably tested by choosing to go down this road. Have you found it to be kind of a lonely path to seek this out, or do you find support?
Yeah, I think all my friends are in this room.
Wow.
I'm just kidding, but kind of not. It's very lonely. People step back from you. I can clear a room, you know, if I start talking about this.
I've heard so many credible reports of a lot of Masonic, a lot of horrible abuse happening within Masonic lodges, and there are a lot of powerful people obviously connected to Masonic lodges, that I do believe that a lot of ritual abuse happens within Masonic lodges. Now, I am not saying that all Masons by any means are practicing evil. I don't believe that. But in fact, I have actually no way of knowing how much the ritual abuse that happens in Masonic lodges is actually somehow part of the structure of Freemasonry versus how much it's people who are using that for their own proclivities, you know. So, but quite a few survivors that I find highly credible claim that their abusers were important Freemasons.
Paedophile Mason ran lodge set up for GCHQ. One of Britain's most influential paedophiles was the head of a Masonic lodge founded and frequented by GCHQ spies, by James Fielding. Keith Harding, former membership secretary of the Paedophile Information Exchange, was made worshipful master of the Merciless Lodge in Cheltenham, Gloucestershire, in 2011. The child molester, who died last summer, presided over ceremonies and rituals from an ornate throne. Harding was convicted of an indecent assault against 4 young children aged 8 and 9 in 1958 and classified a Schedule 1 offender, which meant the offence remained on his criminal record all his life. His name was also on a list of about 400 PI members seized by police in 1984, the year the organisation disbanded. The Sunday Express revealed earlier this month how Harding met MPs Cyril Smith and Leon Britton in the 1980s when he ran a North London antique store. 35 years ago, he appeared alongside paedophile television presenter Jimmy Savile in a Christmas special of Jim'll Fix It. The lodge boasts of its government communications headquarters heritage on its website. A source close to Harding revealed the Merciless Lodge is known as the Spies Lodge because it was set up by GCHQ and over the years, many intelligence officers have become members. These are people trained to find out sensitive information, and yet none of them had any idea of Keith's background and past convictions. They even voted him the highest honour by making him Worshipful Master. Keith felt the Freemasons were somewhere he finally belonged. He called them his Brotherhood. When he died last year, they arranged his funeral and made sure the ceremony started at midday because the time apparently has significance within Masonic ritual. Spies displaced from London and Bletchley Park in Buckinghamshire, where the German wartime Enigma code was cracked, set up the Merciless Lodge in 1957. It meets at the Grade II listed Cheltenham Masonic Hall, purpose-built in 1823. Harding ran the Mechanical Music Museum 10 miles away in Northleach after moving from London in 1987. In 2013, he organised a trip to the museum for Freemasons and their families. A photograph shows Harding wearing a Masonic apron, collar and medals during a ceremony a couple of years ago. The Merciless Lodge last night declined to comment. Detectives probing historical sexual abuse allegations revealed on Wednesday they are investigating 1,433 suspects, including 135 from the entertainment industry, 76 politicians, 7 sportsmen, and 43 from the music industry. Brother Cyril Smith of the Mercurius Lodge, number 7507. Brother Cyril Smith, after 35 years in which Fleet Street ignored the fact that Cyril Smith, MBE, was a predatory pedophile, the Daily Mail decided on its front page last Saturday that there had been a monstrous cover-up. Private Eye's first detailed account of Brother Smith's Masonic crimes appeared as long ago as May 1979, issue 454. That more people have not taken the crime seriously before now is saddest of all for Smith's youngest victims. Pupils at a residential school for boys in Rochdale called Knoll View, who were abused by him in the 1980s and 1990s. After decades of denials, Freemason-dominated Rochdale Council began to reassess Knoll View School in 2012 after Chris Marshall alleged that he was forced to perform a sex act with Smith on school property while another well-dressed man looked on. More than a dozen former pupils are also identified as abuse victims, other men, in internal council reports. They too have never received justice. In January, Rochdale Council appointed Andrew Warnock, QC, to appraise its supervising role in the school, which was home to dozens of boys aged between 8 and 16. Warnock reports next month. A parallel investigation by Greater Manchester Police has now identified 11 suspects connected with the school. Victims can be forgiven for not feeling reassured. GMP has now been looking at Knoll View for 20 years and has secured but a single conviction. Meanwhile, Warnock's review is confined to examining Knoll View's history from the late 1980s to mid-1990s, which may mean vital truths about the preceding decades remain buried. For example, Warnock will consider a series of horrific reports made by Phil Shepherd, a health worker who visited Knoll View in 1991, and a consultant clinical psychologist who investigated the school in 1992. These reveal that up to a third of the residential pupils have been involved in some stage in serious sexual incidents. They describe how boys in the senior dorm were sexually attacked over a period of 2 nights by a paedophile called Rodney Hilton in 1990, and they reveal that pupils in their early teens were working as rent boys. According to former pupils who have spoken to Private Eye, such problems began years earlier, however. For example, one former pupil alleges that Hilton abused and beat him on school property, specifically in the woods adjoining the grounds, in the early 1980s, a period outside Warnock's remit. Another former pupil, Michael Seed, the Franciscan friar who would later persuade Tony Blair into the Catholic faith, describes a well-organised contingent of rent boys selling their bodies to curb calling paedophile homosexuals. In his memoirs, he joined Knoll View in 1970. While Warnock's appraisal concerns events beginning in the late 80s, the real question is why problems were not addressed long before. For Knoll View's earliest history is even darker, and Smith was not the only founder of the school to be suspected of child abuse. From the earliest stages, Brother Smith was assisted by a conservative counsellor and Freemason called Brother Harry Wilde. In the late 1960s, Smith and Wilde chaired Rochdale's powerful education and children committees and started Knoll View together, delegating the power to appoint staff to the governing body on which they would later serve. Police investigations into Brother Smith, which began in the mid-1960s and was shut down in 1970, identify Wilde as his close associate. The file police prepared in 1969 states, Councillor Harry Wilde has been viewed with suspicion regarding his association with young men and boys at Rochdale. In the decades that followed, that suspicion only grew. By the 1990s, after Wilde stood down from the council, he was targeted by Operation European, another Greater Manchester Police child abuse investigation. In 2000, the Manchester Evening News reported the allegations after JMP's Chief Constable intervened to prevent Wilde's appointment as High Sheriff of Greater Manchester. Wilde told the paper that his community work made him vulnerable to mischievous claims. Of course, one has to consider the type of boy at Knoll View, low grade really. Just like Brother Smith, he was never convicted, and Brother Wilde died aged 80 in 2001. How much of this Warnock is prepared to acknowledge will be known next month, but even if he could examine the full length of the school's life, some victims can never receive justice. One council report confirmed that, aged 14, Ian Broomhead was raped by Rodney Hilton during the overnight intrusion into the senior dorm. He fought back on the second night and continued to fight after he left Knoll View. With the assistance of the school's social worker, Martin Diggin, and health worker Phil Shepherd, Broomhead began proceedings against Rochdale Council. His case was reopened by Louise Jury in The Independent. She obtained Broomhead's only interview, anonymised on publication in 1995. It was physical force, he said of Hilton's attack. He threw me against the wall, threw me around the room. He threatened to kill me if I told anybody. Afterwards, Broomhead lay in bed terrified, hearing other pupils screaming, but no staff were on duty. He raged against Hilton. If I saw him again, I'd kill him. Against the school. Before I went there, I had a life. I don't have one now. And against Rochdale Council. I want to go to the Black Box, a nickname for Rochdale's old municipal officers, and just blow the whole lot of them. By coincidence, Broomhead's solicitors were the Masonic Molesworth's Bright Clegg, which advised Brother Cyril Smith when police originally investigated his abuses in the 1970s. The senior partner at the firm, Brother John Kay, had also known Smith since birth. Brother Mark Walker, the junior who was past Broomhead's case, was never told by his client that he had also been abused by Brother Cyril Smith while at Knoll View. Broomhead did, however, admit to AIDS worker Phil Shepherd. Ian told me that he was touched by Cyril Smith. Shepherd told the Eye he could go round putting his hands under the bedclothes when the lads were in bed at night. He was getting access. I said at the time that if Brother Cyril Smith was involved, then other councillors would be involved. At that time, Rochdale Council said the necessary action had been taken, but the pupils in Broomhead's era were horribly damaged. Several interviewed for this article received regular psychological treatment, many have criminal records. I've been close to suicide, Ian Broomhead said in his interview with Louise Jury, and I'm extremely lucky I haven't gone to prison. He died of a drug overdose 10 months later. He was 20 years old. Last week, the current leader of Rochdale Council, Brother Colin Lambert, an employee of Brother Jim Dobbin MP, pledged that he will not stop until the truth is out. The sentiment is fine, but for Ian Broomhead is far too late, and no one in Rochdale believes a word Brother Lambert says. Private Eye, 1364, 18th of April to the 1st of May 2014, page 29. Cyril Smith was a Unitarian, a Christian theological movement, and a Freemason of GCHQ Mercurius Lodge, number 7507. He was a Liberal Member of Parliament for Rochdale and a sadistic paedophile. He was a friend of the Queen Mother, Jimmy Savile, Ted Heath, and other known child abusers and murderers, as well as knighted by Queen Elizabeth II. Smith was a close friend of asbestos firm Turner and Newall. He would socialise with company bosses. They would attend speeches in the House of Commons, which they wrote. It is said he spent time wining and dining them on several occasions. Some of Smith's speeches were written by the asbestos firm. In a letter to a Turner and Newall director, Smith wrote, "Could you please, within the next 8 weeks, let me have the speech you would like me to make? Were you able to, in that debate? Of course the speech was extremely useful to me because it made me sound as if I could speak intelligently on a subject I knew little about," Smith went on. Smith was such a deceptive politician. Not only did he sexually abuse multiple defenceless British children, he knowingly misled the British public, maintaining 4,000 deaths was a relatively low number of people to have lost their lives because of asbestos. According to Smith, it's not like, how can I put it, like flu and contagious. It wasn't infectious in the sense you can have a man and a wife and one would have it and the other one wouldn't. It is now known the partners of factory workers and tradesmen who work with asbestos do die from inhaling the dust on the clothes or hair. So do members of the public. Asbestos-related diseases are incurable and claim at least 4,000 lives a year. Smith's deception doesn't just end there. He attempted to smear journalists who made a documentary regarding the dangers of asbestos, knowing that members of the British public, including children, were losing their lives. Because of Smith, families were destroyed. Mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers went through a lifetime of hate, suffering and emotional pain. I suppose for Smith, being the type of man he was, a psychopath and a sadist, he would not feel remorse for his actions, and the suffering of others would have made him sexually aroused. In 1982, Yorkshire Television, which is now ITV Yorkshire, produced a documentary called Alice, Fight for Life, which uncovered an extensive corporate cover-up in the asbestos industry regarding cancer. The documentary was about a 47-year-old British woman called Alice Jefferson, who developed a rare form of cancer known as malignant pleural mesothelioma, 30 years after working for Cape Insulation's Acre Mill asbestos plant in Hebden Bridge, West Yorkshire. At the time of the documentary, sadistic pedophile Cyril Smith was the MP for Rochdale. Turner and Newall was the largest asbestos company in Britain. According to documents seen by Rochdale Online, Smith and Turner and Newall tried to destroy the reputation of the documentary researchers and journalists post-documentary broadcast. The documents reportedly show confidential intelligence reports on the private lives of the journalists connected to the documentary and meetings they attended. Smear tactics used by Smith and Turner and Newall against Yorkshire Television in parliamentary speeches and at a select committee hearing against Yorkshire TV Ogre. Cyril Smith's soundbites, protected by parliamentary privilege, designed to undermine the television station in newspaper headlines. Smith accused the documentary makers of lying and demanded that Turner and Newall sue Yorkshire Television. An orchestrated and crude letter-writing campaign in the local media, attacking the documentary journalists and defending asbestos production, corporate monitoring and some successful attempts to ban overseas broadcasts of the documentary. Because of the actions of politicians and journalists in certain media organisations, members of the British public have died and countless other lives have been shattered through loss of family and friends. Before pedophile politician Cyril Smith died in 2010, while being protected by the British intelligence and police force, he admitted to owning shares in Turner and Newall. Because of the politician's actions, the Health and Safety Executive has predicted a further 50,000 plus UK deaths in the decades to come.
You just felt you wouldn't be believed because of who he was and because of who I was, basically. And I just thought, well, he's untouchable anyway.
For years, Paul Miller says he felt like he was carrying a terrible secret, and for years he blamed himself.
Well, I've got no relationship with my parents because they let that happen, kind of thing, and didn't take much notice. I've had depression problems, alcohol problems. I went through a stage of rage.
Mr. Miller grew up in a children's home in Leicester. He was often bullied at school and made to feel worthless, until, he says, he was singled out by his local MP, Greville Janner, who had come to visit his school.
It was 4 years, and it chose a boy and a girl out of each year. Says, you know, how would you like to come and visit the House of Commons and see Big Ben, you know, because we were excited. I'd never been to London in my life, you know, so yeah, you know. So
you obviously thought, as any kid would, it was a great opportunity.
I thought it was a fantastic day out, yeah, but really excited, you know.
He claims that Lord Janner took the children on a tour of the House of Commons.
The rest of the group left, and I was left on my own with him in the chapel. And then, to be honest, all of a sudden out of the blue, he just grabbed me and embraced me.
And then Mr. Miller alleges he was sexually assaulted by Greville Jenner. His claim is one of those that was investigated by Leicestershire Police. But despite the evidence that was collected, in April there was anger when the CPS decided Lord Jenner would not be charged with historic sexual abuse because he has severe dementia.
When you heard that the DPP had decided not to go ahead with the prosecution, what did you think?
Angry, disappointed, frustrated, because I've carried this monkey for decades, you know.
But today his alleged victims say they were given new hope with a new development. It's emerged that Scottish police are now investigating claims that Greville Jenner abused a teenager on a trip to Scotland in the 1970s. Lord Jenner hasn't been seen in public for some time. Channel 4 News filmed these pictures of him back in 2014. The peer has always denied all of the allegations against him. His family say he's entirely innocent of any wrongdoing. Paul Miller says he just wants his day in court.
I was just a kid from a council estate, from a council-run children's home. He was a powerful politician, so I just didn't think anybody would believe me.
He has decided to speak out and to waive his right to anonymity because he no longer blames himself for what he claims happened all those years ago.
I says, yeah, I'm quite happy to appear in my name, where I live in Leicester, because I've done nothing wrong. So why should I hide away? You know, he's the one that's hiding away.
On to talk about Freemasonry now, because over the last few years this programme has exposed two prominent local politicians as Freemasons. Former Mayor of Weston-super-Mare Philip Judd, who's now serving a 14-month jail sentence for possessing hundreds of pornographic images of films of children, and last Parliament's MP for Filton and Bradley Stoke, Jack Lepresti, both Conservatives.
Former Weston Mayor is jailed for 14 months for child porn offences by M. Ribic, posted September 15, 2014, in the Bristol Post. A former town mayor, who admitted downloading more than 350 indecent pictures and videos of children, has been jailed for 14 months. Philip Judd, 60, pleaded guilty to 12 charges of making indecent photographs of a child and possessing prohibited images when he appeared at Bristol Crown Court last month. The court was told he was found with 151 films and 200 indecent images of children during a search of his home in Trenley Drive, Wall, Weston-super-Mare. Former Conservative councillor Judd was Mayor of Weston-super-Mare between 2010 and 2011 and is also a former Vice Chairman of North Somerset Council.
It was a very convoluted time. There were a multitude of secret societies.
From about 1888, well into the 1920s, hundreds of secret societies formed, reformed, and gave birth to new and even more secret subgroups. Some were dangerous nationalistic orders, like the Serbian Black Hand Society, responsible for the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria.
Black Hand Society was largely responsible for the First World War.
And many of the era's dark fellowships were simply racist, sharing the sentiments of Lanz von Liebenfels, who believed Aryans were gods.
He also believed that the Jews were literally children of the devil.
The 30 years leading to the formation of the Vril Society was an era obsessed with the strange combination of racial solidarity and the occult.
Magic and occult ideas dominated the thinking of virtually every class of society in the late 19th century.
But of all the mystics of the time, one person's writings may have been the genesis of the phenomenal occult frenzy. Madame Helene Petrova Blavatsky.
I would say that Blavatsky provided the metaphysical framework that has gathered together the vast, vast streams of the ancient wisdom into a coherent system.
Blavatsky founded the Theosophical Society in 1875 and established herself as a kind of sage in the occult realm. Theosophists believe in a combination of Asian and occult ideas to promote the concept of a superior Aryan race.
She traveled throughout the world for spiritual reasons.
Madame Blavatsky wrote, well, several books, but the particularly influential one was The Secret Doctrine.
It was based on knowledge she acquired in India and Tibet.
She claimed that she got her teachings from secret messages from Mahatmas in the Himalayas.
This groundbreaking book, written in 1885, did something no other book had ever done. It combined science and religion. Most sources say that the Vril Society was founded in 1918 at a mysterious meeting in the Bavarian town of Berchtesgaden. It was a holiday center and would later house the country retreat of Adolf Hitler. It is said that in a mountain lodge, a group of occultists and high-ranking German nationalists secretly gathered to create a powerful inner circle called the All-German Society for Metaphysics, otherwise known as the Vril Society.
Essentially, it was founded by two people, Rudolf von Sebottendorf.
Von Sebottendorf had been very active in the occult movement. He was a Freemason, an alchemist, and a founder of the Tula Society. Their belief in a mythical civilization was a precursor to Nazi Aryan ideas.
His real name was Adam Glauer, and he was the son of an engine driver, but he gave himself, awarded himself a title of nobility.
In creating the Vril Society, von Sebottendorf was joined by a man who would darkly influence world history.
The other main person within it was Dietrich Eckart.
He was said to have strong powers of persuasion, particularly in his anti-Semitic writings.
Dietrich Eckart was Hitler's closest personal friend between 1918 and his death in 1923.
Eckart believed he was paving the road for Germany's own savior.
He was, in many respects, a mad genius. It's no accident he spent a great part of his time in and out of mental institutions.
The founder of the Vril went by a very curious name.
John the Baptist.
And we all know that in the Bible, John Baptist is a sort of paver of the road for the true Messiah.
Eckart was also one of the masterminds behind the Nazi Party.
Eckart saw Hitler as the German Messiah. He saw him as the man sent to save the country.
And he wasn't the only Vril founder who felt that way. It has been suggested that these two men were joined by two women, mediums responsible for finding the hidden occult truths and harvesting Vril.
In those days, it was the golden age of what was known as physical mediumship, where not only were they forever moving objects and table turning and levitating, but also they used to produce a substance called ectoplasm out of their bodies.
One of these mediums is said to have predicted the new German Messiah.
During her state of trance, she declared that the apparition she had given form to was going to be the next German Messiah, who she proceeded to name as Adolf Hitler.
So the Vril Society may have indeed paved the way for the person they would promote as the country's Messiah. Their next step would have been to secure his ultimate weapon, Vril.
They believed that that would give them power.
This occult group of German nationalists may have grown quickly to become an elite inner circle of the Nazi Party.
Many of the top leaders, including Hitler himself, were members of the Vril Society. Karl Harrer, Anton Drexler and Dietrich Eckart are three of the most important figures in the transition from the Vril Society to the Nazi Party.
Eckart was considered the darkest of them all and dedicated to Hitler's success.
He did have certain perverse gifts, and not least of which was his ability to train Hitler in the use of, you know, what one might loosely call the power of a human heart and human mind.
Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, was said to be a member.
It is virtually certain that he was introduced to it in around 1920, probably by Dietrich Eckart.
Alfred Rosenberg, minister of the Third Reich, probably a member.
Rosenberg believed that the Aryan race was superior to every other, of course, and, you know, he believed that Jesus was not Jewish, but an Aryan.
Rudolf Hess, deputy Führer, another likely member.
Hess believed everything. He used to sleep with magnets under his bed to try and draw off harmful emanations.
Martin Bormann, chief of the Nazi Party Chancellery, also thought to be a member.
Martin Bormann was probably considered the most evil one. He was an avowed and open Satanist. He was quite categorical about his desire to exterminate Christianity as well as Judaism, because he saw Christianity as simply, as he called it, a Jewish perversion.
And the most senior Nazi in the Vril Society, Adolf Hitler himself.
A great many of the Vril Society members were conscious Satanists.
And these evil men were emblazoned with a symbol, the swastika.
The darkest side of the Vril was undoubtedly their belief, which dates back many thousands of years, that to sacrifice a young child will give more power than anything else if you are turning to the darkness. And that is what they did.
After the First World War, many illegitimate and orphan children lived in Bavaria. Children whose disappearance would go unnoticed. And legend had it that the vril of a child was the most concentrated and most powerful.
They were seen as being gateways between the astral and the material world in a way that adults were not. So consequently, they were ideal victims for human sacrifice.
To the year 1917. 4 men and a woman met here in the Viennese cafe Schopenhauer. The young Maria Ortisch, a spiritualistic medium from Zagreb, the student and fighter pilot Lothar Weitz, the occultist, orientalist and officer Karl Haushofer, Rudolf von Sebottendorf, an occultist who had recently returned from the Orient, as well as Prelate Gernot from the Order of Knights Templar. Their subject was the coming of the New Age. They spoke of secret revelations, the spear of destiny, the magical violet black stone. They discussed the possibility of making transmedial contact with the ancient Germanic and Babylonian deities, Ishtar Ostara and Isais, and of communicating with distant worlds, not only on this side, but also on the other. It is quite likely that this coffeehouse meeting witnessed the birth of the secret Thule Society, which in turn later spawned the German National Socialist Party, the SS, Black Sun, and the Vril Society, which in its turn gave a foundation to the occult activities of the Third Reich